You are listening to the Hamingja podcast, the renaissance of Western spirituality, paganism and animism. We show the dharmic path and common origin of Norse, Germanic, Vedic, Greco-Roman, Celtic, Balto-Slavic and Persian beliefs. We also draw parallels to the proto-Indo-European worldview and the ancient beliefs we call the religion with no name. The Hamingja podcast weaves the threads together to understand where we come from and let our true nature empower us in everyday life. We don't have to turn to the east. The answers were always right here. We are all pagan by instinct. Welcome to a new episode of the Hamingja podcast. Us at the Hamingja Foundation shape future Indo-European spiritual leaders. We believe in quality over quantity, so sometimes when a little bit more time passes between the podcast episodes, I recommend our Instagram account and the blog on our website, hamingja.foundation. In both places, we share deep-going posts covering Indo-European spiritual phenomena, rites, ceremonies, etc. We also have a very active Discord server, a fertile soil for learning even more in a warm community, and where we also have guest talks, we feast together, and many other events. And speaking of feasts, we celebrated the winter solstice with a wonderful symbol or symposium. For those of you who are new to your native path, or those who just need some inspiration for other ways to celebrate the winter solstice next year, go to our site, again, hamingja.foundation, and under Inspiration in the main menu, you'll find an article with authentic and well-attested ways and activities for the solstice. Now, you've seen the title, so you know that today's episode will be about the sacred drink within Indo-European spirituality. In the vast tapestry of Indo-European spiritual heritage, a red thread weaves through the heart of rituals, connecting disparate cultures and civilizations. The sacred drink. Its origins veiled in the mists of time, this elixir stands as a mysterious yet revered essence that binds the tapestry of beliefs and practices across ancient societies. While shrouded in obscurity, its significance persists as one of the most profound and pivotal elements of early Indo-European spirituality. Across the ancient pantheon of Indo-European cultures, be it the Vedic rituals of ancient India, the mead halls of Nordic legends, or the mystical practices of the ancient Celts, the sacred drink emerges as a central yet enigmatic motif. Its consumption symbolizes a conduit to the divine, an offering to the gods, a channel for spiritual enlightenment, and a celebration of life's cyclical nature. This is an episode I never thought I'd do, actually, simply because the sacred drink is perhaps the most central phenomenon within this field. And the topic is so vast that even if I sat here talking for a year, I wouldn't do it justice. However, since it is so central and defining, there just has to be a Hamingja episode covering it. It's an episode introducing the sacred drink and other topics concerning it, offering a platform to stand on for your future studies of the sacred drink and learning of the rituals involving it. I also want to say before we begin that this is a very complex topic and episode, and the Hamingja Foundation as such does maintain a high level and standard. Those of you who have just begun your spiritual journey on the eternal natural path. This is something that you sooner or later are gonna have to understand. But take it at your own pace, and I recommend you listen to this episode several times, actually. Like I said, we also have our Discord server, and if you're committed to deepening your Indo-European spirituality, you're welcome to join. But without further ado, let's take a deep sip of the divine nectar. Let's start with the word mead. That's a good place to start. Most pagans, both new and experienced, especially Norse or continental Germanic and Anglo-Saxon pagans, have heard of the mead of inspiration. Some drink mead at their rites and get-togethers, but fewer know how old this word really is, what it means, and what kind of beverage it is they're really drinking. In the Veda scriptures, the oldest spiritual sources us Indo-Europeans have, the word madhu is mentioned countless times. What's interesting about that is that it is always mentioned in conjunction or synonymously with the sacred drink of the Vedics, soma. The same goes for the Avestan or Persian texts talking about their cognate sacred drink, homa. So in addition to the English word mead and the Norse and modern Scandinavian mjöd, and even the Russian word mjod, we have several ancient sources written in Indo-European languages mentioning this word. It must therefore have an older common origin, and it does. Today's Persian word for wine, may, goes back to the old Iranian and Avestan madhu and madhu, meaning honey or sweet. Closely related to this is also the Avestan word mada, meaning intoxication. And in its close relative Sanskrit, we also have the word madhu, meaning honey and sweet, nectar or even charming. In Welsh, we have the word medw, meaning drunk. And in Old Irish, we have medb, both with the same meaning and root. And I apologize for my pronunciation of the Celtic words. This word and concept is so old that it goes all the way back to Proto-Indo-European. And the word medu, with the same connotation and etymology, sweet or honey. So it is this word that is used countless times synonymously with the liquid gift they're incessantly offering to the gods in the Veda texts, soma, that is. Something that's sweet as honey, something that is quote-unquote charming, that's to say something that has an influence on you, something that is as sweet as nectar. And in the Upanishads, later Vedic philosophical texts, we can read about the concept madhuvidya, literally meaning honey knower or knowledge of the sweet, but really meaning to know the divine within everything, or knowing the divine essence within everything. So we already have quite a few clues here. We know that there's a word, medu or madhu, that has lived on in an unbroken chain from the Proto-Indo-Europeans to today's Indo-European languages. It's associated with a sweet and honey-based alcoholic beverage. We know that the oldest Indo-European languages use the word for sweet and honey interchangeably with their sacred drink, soma and homa, etc. And we know that its sweetness is to be understood as a symbol of having insight into or access to the divine core. And if we dig a bit deeper into what the sugar-rich flower liquid nectar, or even the peach variant nectarine really means, we see that that too goes all the way back to the Proto-Indo-Europeans via the ancient Greeks, namely meaning unkillable and thus immortal. So nectar means unkillable or immortal. For those who really want more Sanskrit parallels, I can also mention that Amrita, mentioned very, very often in the Vedic texts, another word often used for the sacred drink, it also means eternal or immortal. You can almost hear that if you think of the negating prefix a and adding mortal or unmortal. So we can sum up this first part by saying that throughout the Indo-European languages and cultures, there's a sweet liquid which can be equated with the sweetness of the divine and the sweetness of immortality. And that this drink obviously has an intoxicating effect on those who drink it. Okay, so we know that this drink appears everywhere in all the Indo-European languages, scriptures, and traditions. But what is it? Where does it come from? What does it symbolize? And why do we and the cosmos need it? Well, to understand that, it's best that we start at the very beginning. And I really mean the very beginning. Most of you surely know the Indo-European creation myths. For example, the Norse one, where there was initially nothing, no cosmos, no structure, only the gaping abyss of Ginnungagap. This chaos of perfect silence and darkness lay between the homeland of elemental fire and the homeland of elemental ice, or maybe we should say water. Frost from Niflheim and billowing flames from Muspelheim crept toward each other until they met in Ginnungagap. Amid the hissing and sputtering, the fire melted the ice, and the drops formed themselves into Ymir. As the frost continued to melt, a cow, Audhumla, emerged from it. She nourished Ymir with her milk, and she, in turn, was nourished by salt licks in the ice. In the Veda scriptures, there are several creation myths, but in one of the most well-known, darkness was hidden by darkness in the beginning. And this void was an indistinguishable sea. And it is the meeting between this indistinguishable sea and, quote-unquote, the power of heat that creates the manifest universe. Or, as they write, by the great power of warmth was born that unit. So there seems to be also several Proto-Indo-European creation myths. They told a lot of stories, to say the least. But in the original one, the thunderer, or the striker, enters through his land of clouds, the waters of heaven, with his spear of lightning and his club of fire. He slays the serpent, and it is this mix of water, fire, and the serpent's blood that makes the world fertile, and the fertile earth grows. The primordial waters that meet fire is one of the most central Indo-European mysteries, and it is this symbolism, this fusion of fire and water that we must remember. It's super important. It's absolutely crucial if we want to understand the sacred drink properly, what it is, what it represents, why we offer and drink it, and what it really does. Because this fiery liquid is the big mystery behind it. At the creation, the manifest cosmos and existence takes the shape of the world tree reaching up, in its roots stretching down. At the very center we find the well of primordial waters, into which all our knowledge, all memories, actions, and all cause and effect flow, filling the well. Here we once again see the eternal gift-giving cycle, which is so important in all the Indo-European cultures. The fruits of all that happens and all that takes place, it falls down into the well, while the waters of the well in its turn feeds the tree through its roots. So it's again this gift-giving cycle. And it is there at the very center where the waters of chaos meet the ordered structure that we also find the sacred fire, always at the center. The chaos and volatility of water and the ordered heat from the sacrificial fire are now united, or the waters of purification are united with the fire of sacrifice, if you will. Fire represents the spiritual aspect of existence, and water represents the more earthly and tangible aspect. One can say that Father Sky and Mother Earth are now united in a holy marriage. The sacred drink is this unity. It is this fusion in a fiery liquid. In a cosmological sense, the point at which the drink enters our realm is the mouth of the well. It enters from the very center. At the mouth of the well burns the eternal flame. This is where the water from the well, the force of chaos entering the cosmos, meets with the fire of offering. We have seen the importance of the controlled influx of chaos for the survival and thriving of cosmos and order, and vice versa. One can't be without the other. And where this happens, at the very center of existence, that's where divinity and immortality is. That's where the eternal flame burns, and where the water flows out in this cosmic fiery liquid. That's why it was originally called nectar by the Proto-Indo-Europeans, meaning unkillable or immortal, as I mentioned before. This is what is divine, and what makes the creation and existence, life and death go round and round eternally. In that very point, life and death, creation and destruction are one and the same. And this essence is nectar. The relationship between fire and water in Indo-European spirituality is very complex. It's hard to wrap your head around. To understand it, we have to go back to the creation myth where the striker, or sometimes fire personified, comes down hidden in rain. It goes through water, so to say, and enters existence. The Vedics said that the fire god Agni, stemming from the Proto-Indo-European word hengis, was born in water. This aspect of the thunderer and or fire deity was called Apam Napat by the Vedics. And that too goes all the way back to the Proto-Indo-European deity Aquam Nepot. And it means of the water, related to water, or dwelling in water. The last part, Nepot or Napat, is etymologically cognate with nephew. So it's someone who's related to something. And this deity, or aspect of the lightning or fire god, lived on in, for example, the Roman god Neptune. Note that Neptune wasn't initially a god of the sea, but rather of fresh water and springs. In fact, the earliest Indo-European peoples most likely didn't have a god of the sea. I mean, how could they, considering that they lived on the vast grasslands of the Pontic-Caspian steppe, and they weren't surrounded by sea? It wasn't until later that he gradually evolved into a sea god and was associated with Poseidon. A very interesting thing here is that experts have studied why this primordial imagery of fire in water even emerged, from where the early Indo-European peoples even got it. The most likely explanation is that it actually emerged from the phenomenon of marsh gas or swamp gas. These steppes were and are very rich in natural gas, and the Proto-Indo-Europeans must have seen this gas burning underwater and on the surface of the water. And it gets even more interesting when we realize that words like naphtha, naphthalene, napalm, and even the Swedish flammable liquid naphtha or lacknafta have cognates in, for example, Old Persian naphtha, Greek and Latin naphtha, and they can all be traced back to the Proto-Indo-European root nepot. So it seems like this aspect of the thunderer, aquam nepot, and the Vedic god apam napat, really means related to or dwelling in this petroleum or hydrocarbon natural gas, or even oil, in fact, that seeps up through the water, ignites, and keeps burning on the surface. So this part of the creation myth must have come from there. It's super interesting. Compare what I've just said with, for example, in the millennia later Ynglingatal, where the kenning goes, the kinsman of the sea swallowed the ship of the will, where the words sevar nidr refer to fire. Compare also with the Roman historian Livy, who says that to stop the overflow of the Alban lake Neptune, positioned in an extinct volcano, quote, we have to extinguish it, a word otherwise obviously used only for fire. And again, in India, the god Apam Napat was so closely related to fire that he was very, very often referred to as Agni himself, the fire god. Examples like these show that the phenomenon and myth of the fire through water and the fiery liquid was never forgotten by our ancestors. Wherever we go in our sources and myths and tales, the serpent is always blocking water. And for the water to flow, as mentioned before, the serpent has to be slain. And who is it that slays this water-blocking serpent? Well, to give some examples, it is Thor among the Germanic peoples, originally actually called Fjörgyn, cognate with the Proto-Indo-European striker god Perkunos. In India, it is the thunder god Indra, slaying the serpent Vritra. In Rome and Greece, it was Hercules, originally regarded as wielding and hurling thunderbolts. It was him who slayed Hydra. And Hydra, the name itself, actually means water in a feminine form. Interesting. We'll soon talk more about Hercules and him being related to the sacred drink. There's also a Balto-Slavic motif of the storm god combating a serpent. By the way, it seems like the water serpent and the serpent of drought and dry earth are the same, as the Chthonic python is slain by Apollo, who then liberates the waters. this too aligns with the fire and water myth. Now back to Aquam Nepot. He dwells in the waters. He is the guardian of the well and the outflow at the base of the world tree. But why does the well need protection? For several reasons. Those who want to drink from it and use its benefits, they must first deserve it. The gifts of the well are available only to the virtuous. They need to be worthy. They need to be spiritually pure. They must approach the well in an appropriate ritual manner. And obviously there needs to be a sacrifice. There's no such thing as a free lunch in the reciprocal gift-giving cycle of Indo-European spirituality and culture. Odin too wanted to drink from the well, to gain wisdom and insight into the mysteries of cosmos, and remember everything he went through to get a sip. In a Persian myth, the guardian god Apam Napat, with the same name and is the same god as in the Vedic scriptures. He dwells in and guards a sacred lake in which they store the drink Khwarena, meaning glory and fortune in life. And it's another name for the sacred drink Homa. The hero Franrasyan, he tries to claim it for kingship, but he's not worthy. And the water rises, flows out and escapes him. In Greek and Roman myth, we have the slightly forgotten aspect of Neptune and Poseidon, that he's the protector of the mysteries. He's responsible for the so-called proeros, the ascending progress of the soul to a more elevated state of being, and to deification. Without this proeros, the jurisdiction of Neptune or Poseidon, entry to and insight into the mysteries it's impossible. In the Celtic myth about Nectan and his wife Boan, there's a well of wisdom surrounded by 9 sacred hazel trees, dropping their wisdom-bearing nuts into the well. Note that this is almost exactly like the original Proto-Indo-European myth mentioned earlier, where it's an eternal gift-giving between the tree's fruits falling into water and the water feeding the tree. So only Nectan and his 3 cupbearers, named Flesh, Lam, and Luam. Again, I apologize for my pronunciation. Those 3 were the only ones permitted to approach the well, but Nectan's wife Boan, she breaks several of the social laws by approaching the well and wanting to drink from its waters of wisdom, despite the fact that she's not worthy. And she also challenges the well by walking around it counterclockwise, what the Celts called tuathal, which also goes against all Indo-European spiritual rules. This causes the waters to surge up violently, overflow and rush down to the sea, creating the Boyne, the river Boyne, according to the myth. In this catastrophe, she was swept along in the rushing waters. She lost an arm, a leg, an eye, and ultimately her life in this flood. Again, there's always a sacrifice. This is also one of the reasons why pagans sacrifice. We imitate and reproduce the original sacrifices, the original meetings of giving and taking. And just by mentioning this myth, just to show you the complexity of this topic and how it's close to impossible to cover all of this in an episode of around an hour, just by mentioning this myth, at least 3 new threads show up. 1. the fact that Nectan's name also stems from this Proto-Indo-European root nepot that I mentioned earlier, and that it's also directly related to mythological water beings like the English neck, Anglo-Saxon that he's called Nikor, Swedish Näcken, German Nixe, Dutch Nickel, etc. 2. That the name Boan actually means white cow, and is of course a direct reflection of the primordial cow suckling the world, perhaps the most ancient sacred drink. And 3. The concept of cupbearer. This is reflected in rituals in all the Indo-European branches. The first round of the sacred drink, like mead and ale in the chieftains' halls, should always be served by a woman. The cupbearer also has links to the libation itself, and where the word god or godly actually stems from a Proto-Indo-European root meaning to pour. So he or she who pours the libations is godly. But I just can't dive deeper into every sidetrack here. I could honestly sit here and talk for years about these things, but to keep this episode somewhat pedagogical and cohesive, I need to stick to the main track. For now, you once again just gotta take my word for that all these myths and concepts all spring from the same source. Another important reason why Aquam Nepot is protecting the well is that it is divine, and that everyone else wants it. Like I've said before, the main concept of Indo-European spirituality is the strive for order and balance. There should be a healthy balance and giving and taking between chaos and cosmos. But one mustn't become more prominent than the other. And it is our duty to make sure that we strive for order, beauty, and light. If Aquam Nepot doesn't guard the sacred drink, it would simply get stolen. It's happened before. Everyone desires it. Serpents, monsters, and dragons block the divine flow of the cyclical creation. The Jötnar, the chaos powers disguised as an eagle in this case, have kidnapped Idun and stolen her apples of immortality. And the gods realize that without her magic apples, they would wither and grow old and eventually die. In Rigveda, the sacred drink Soma is held captive by the archer Krishanu. But it's stolen or taken back by a falcon and given to Manu, who sacrifices it to the storm god Indra. In a Celtic myth, Brian, Iukar, and Icharba, the sons of Tuiren, assume the guise of hawks, so again you see the bird here, in order to steal sacred apples from the garden of Hesperna. In ancient Greece, Helen, here she is a metaphor for the basket of the mysteries. She's been abducted by the Trojans. So the examples are countless of this theft. The theft of the sacred drink is a central symbolism. If the sacred drink gets stolen, it is no longer in its rightful place among the divine. Order has, so to say, been disrupted, and the divine then can't perform all its functions and duties. Remember that Indo-European spirituality doesn't speak about sin, but that things can be temporary in the wrong place. Like pollution isn't sin. It is rather things that are in a place where they shouldn't be. In the same way, the recapture and repossession of the sacred drink is just as central. We once again see the war and giving and taking between the cosmological forces. by performing the sacred drink rituals, consuming and offering it to the divine, we ritually help bringing back the sacred drink to where it belongs. It is in a sense also to recreate the creation myth and the primordial sacrifices. So this is something to think of when you perform your libation rituals, etc. This is what it's about. So it's now very clear that the sacred drink is highly attractive and desirable, even highly theft-prone. But why is that? What exactly is the sacred drink? And what traits, abilities, and benefits make it so desirable? As so often when we want to understand phenomena within Indo-European spirituality, it's a good idea to start in Rig Veda, since it's the oldest spiritual scripture we have, and the closest we get to our oldest ancestors. In Mandala 8, Mandala is book, in Mandala 8 we read, "I have tasted the sweet drink of life, knowing that it inspires good thoughts and joyous expansiveness to the extreme, that all the gods and mortals seek it together, calling it honey, madhu, as I mentioned before. The glorious drops that I have drunk set me free in the wide space. The drops that we have drunk have entered our hearts, an immortal inside mortals. We drank the soma, we became immortal, we reached the light, we found the gods." And we read about how Indra, the thunderer, drinks the sacred drink, making him expand and be strong, and he forces apart heaven and earth, filling this space between them. We also see the Vedics equate the moon god Chandra, with the sacred drink personified, called soma. So the moon god is the same as the sacred drink personified, which becomes clear when we know that Chandra was rather a nickname, meaning bright or shining. And the original Sanskrit word for moon is rather derived from the Proto-Indo-European moon, the moon named Menot, and its root men, having to do with mind, memory, thinking, reckoning, even actually measuring. So the sacred drink was linked to the moon, providing divine insight and inspiration. Compare this with the fact that the Celtic moon goddess Ceridwen, millennia later, was the keeper of the cauldron of knowledge, the giver of wisdom and inspiration. So throughout the Veda scriptures, the gods are portrayed as consuming a sacred drink in copious quantities, not the least the striker Indra, while fighting the serpent who's blocking the waters of life. Already the Proto-Indo-European gods were seen as enmurtos, undying, and without end, simply because they drink a beverage called medu, or nectar. The Greeks too call it nectar, or ambrosia, and kykion. We have amrita and soma in India, homa in Iran, or the Persian Empire. The Norse had their mead, connected to or related to madhu and medu. It's also equated with Idun's apples, and the Celts had many names for it: mead, shushen, keimada, etc. It's safe to say that within Indo-European spirituality, this elixir, scooped out of the well itself, is one of the most central elements, and it lies at the heart of both the cosmology itself and sacred rituals and sacrificial rites, serving as cosmic harmony and a conduit between mortals and the divine. In fact, we don't need to go further than to our own word ale, or the word alu that we find throughout the Germanic world, often thought to be carved as a magic spell by Scandinavians and Anglo-Saxons, to once again bump into the significance of this elixir. Ale actually means influenced or affected by sorcery. This can be compared to the ancient Hittite word alwansa, meaning affected by witchcraft. We can compare it to Greek aluo, meaning to be beside oneself, and the Latvian word aluot, to be distraught or frantic. Again, the literal meaning of the Old Germanic word alu is intoxicating beverage. And we have cognates in Old English and Gothic, such as ale, actually meaning temple, and als, also meaning temple in Gothic. So it's easy to figure out that throughout the Indo-European world there is an intoxicating drink connected to the well by the tree and to the divine forces. And this elixir is divine, all right. It's so divine and desirable that it's been stolen several times, taking it from its rightful place among order and the divine kindreds to the chaos powers. This goes against nature and the cosmic laws, but through a sacrificial ritual, order can be restored. This is, by the way, the mysterious paradox of Indo-European spirituality, that chaos is needed for order, and quote-unquote violence is needed to create frith and peace. The sacred drink is both fire, representing cosmic structure and sacrifice, and water, symbolizing chaos and volatility at the same time. Before figuring out what this drink really does, we first have to understand that it exists in both a cosmological or mythical sense and a ritual sense. In its cosmological sense, or to use Plato's words, its ideal form, the sacred drink exists in the spiritual world only. We can, however, become equated to cosmos and benefit from the drink's good qualities by symbolically and ritually recreating the sacred drink through the quote-unquote mixture and sacrifice of fire and water. By doing that, we ritually stand at a primordial state and bring the sacred drink back to where it belongs, and again offer it to the divine and consume it together with the gods. So again, this is something to think of when you pour your libations, etc. Those of you who have followed this podcast or are well versed in your local pagan branch, you know that the Indo-European peoples divided cosmos and society into 3 layers. The so-called trifunctional hypothesis or tripartite society, permeating everything, with 3 classes or functions: priests, warriors, and herders or cultivators or merchants. Or in a more functional sense, 1 dimension of spirituality and cosmic sovereignty, 1 dimension of military, force, protection, preservation, etc., and 1 dimension of fertility, productivity, farming, herding, crafts, etc. We see this philosophy also when Socrates describes the 3 divisions of the ideal society, and in the functions or aspects of the gods and spirits. So this nectar, the sacred drink, has the power to give blessings for each of these 3 functions. In the first function, it can provide immortality, cosmic sovereignty, insight into divinity and the creation, divination and prophecy, ability to act according to chartus, wisdom, poetic inspiration, etc. Everything that has to do with with religion, so to say, spirituality. In the second function, invincibility, rule, strength, frenzy, the power to act, etc. A more martial aspect. In the third function, things like fertility, prosperity, vitality, healing, etc. When us mortals drink it, we obviously can't expect gifts like immortality and an unending life. After all, we are not gods. A ritual version of it can be drunk by us, however, granting us these gifts to some degree. In all instances, the drink appears as a heightener of abilities and activities. We can be blessed with inspiration, the power to act in our lives, and an unending life in the sense that we can live it fully and with excellence, arete, as the Greeks said. Becoming enlightened about the divine part within ourselves and how to make the most of it. From the myths, it also seems clear that its gifts are given separately. Ritually speaking, we need to make and consume the nectar with a specific intention. Obviously, in addition to that, we want to offer it to and strengthen the gods. When consumed by a spiritual leader or someone with those intentions or that aptitude, it increases his powers of vision and insight, and his ability to guide and advise. It makes the poet more eloquent, the warrior more powerful and pure after battle, the king more generous and just, and it makes the soil fertile and the herds and assets grow. Let's now go through some examples of myths and folklore where the sacred drink appears, to make its effects, spiritual significance and omnipresence even more clear. I've already talked quite a bit about the Proto-Indo-European creation myth, the primeval cow suckling and nurturing the All, the guardian of the fiery waters and the nectar elixir of our oldest ancestors. But it's definitely also worth mentioning the original hero myth about Trito. His name means the third. Trito, in the myth, is offered cattle as a divine gift by the celestial gods. But the cattle is later stolen by a three-headed serpent named Hengwis. Despite initial defeat, Trito, fortified by an intoxicating drink and aided by Father Sky, overcomes the monster and returns the recovered cattle to a priest for it to be properly sacrificed. Trito is also reflected in the Vedic scriptures, here called Trita, same meaning. The hero Trita is associated with thunder, storm and water, so you already see the similarities here. He is connected to the sacred drink several times. For example, when he's fallen or been pushed down into a well, an imprisoned begs aid from the gods. He composed a hymn that pleased the gods, and he managed miraculously to prepare the sacrificial soma drink. He's also often seen assisting or acting in place of the storm and thunder god when fighting Tvastar and slaying the serpent Vritra, mentioned earlier. Vritra is the personification of drought, so it's natural that they want him slain to let water come back and flood the dammed rivers, so to say. Trita is also called Aptya, meaning of the waters, which is mentioned both in Rig Veda and the Avestan or Persian myth. So he too has this relation to fire and water. I mentioned Apam Napad earlier, for example. Indra slaying the serpent after having drunk copious amounts of the sacred drink is another Vedic example. In the Vedic scriptures, there are innumerable examples of the sacred drink. In fact, all of Book 9 of the Rig Veda is dedicated to it. But it can be worth also bringing up the passage, "Flow unto us and make us rich. Drive all our enemies away. Send down the rain from heaven, a stream of opulence from earth. Give us, O Soma, victory in war." Here we see two of the three Indo-European functions, the martial and the fertility one. And in another passage, I'm going to read it here, he gives us kinship with the gods, and with the sun unites our eye. Here we see the first function, the spiritual one. In the Greek and Roman myth, we find thousands of examples of the sacred drink. The Greek and Roman gods are known to give nectar to humans to heal them. Demeter, she anoints Demophon with ambrosia to give him immortality. In the first hymn to Hermes, in the Homeric hymns, it is said that the fates, or the fates, they feed on quote-unquote honey, which you know by now shares etymology with a sweet drink. One of Hercules' 12 labors was to bring back the golden apples of the Hesperides. They grant immortality just like Idun's apples. They grow on a tree that was on the mountain of the world pillar Atlas, just like the fruits on the world tree I spoke about in the beginning. The tree was protected by a 100-headed serpent coiled around it, like the Midgard serpent. Heracles kills the serpent with an arrow, just like Thor kills the Midgard or Middle-earth serpent with his thrown hammer. And he takes back the apples. In the Odyssey, the goddess Circe, or Kirke, advises Odysseus to dig a pit to pour libation to the ancestors in the underworld. And she recommends that it should consist of water, honey, milk, barley, and sweet wine. And remember this for later. The golden apples that Aphrodite gave to Hippomenes before his race with Atalanta, they were also from the garden of the Hesperides. They give him strength and victory in the race. Ambrosia, also meaning overcoming death, as mentioned, and equated with nectar, is conferring immortality and is brought to the gods by birds. It is also with this ambrosia that Hera cleansed all defilement from her lovely flesh. Athenaios writes that in ritual, Zeus is offered a sacred drink. And in Aristophanes' Nights, one of the characters says, "I dreamed the goddess poured ambrosia over your head out of a ladle." The examples are innumerable. And now I haven't even mentioned the great Eleusinian mysteries and the Dionysian mysteries, the most famous of the secret religious rites of ancient Greece. There we see Demeter rejecting a cup of wine and instead asking for a drink of barley, water, and pennyroyal. And this is the drink of the Eleusinian mysteries. The mystery cult revolved around the sacred drink, in this case called Kykion. This is also important that it actually deserves its own podcast episode. In Norse and continental Germanic myth, we also have plenty of examples. The sacred drink was created when the two races of gods, the Aesir and the Vanir, they sealed a treaty by spitting into a vat. From the saliva, the Aesir created a dwarf named Kvasir, who could answer any question. That's to say, he had all the knowledge and insight. He was killed by 2 other dwarves who mixed his blood with honey and made mead. They gave it to the giant Suttung, who gave it to his daughter Gunnlod to guard. Odin wormed his way into Gunnlod's cave, and in return for his spending 3 nights with her, she offered him 3 draughts from the mead. He drank all of it, turned himself into an eagle, and flew away. You see the bird here again. Some of the mead which Odin spat out along the way is the source of inspiration of minor poets mentioned in Skaldskaparmål. The mead of inspiration, normally drunk by the Norse gods, is actually milk from the goat Heidrun, who eats the leaves and the branches of the world tree. This milk is the water from the well, transformed first by the tree and then by the goat. So here too we see the word mead, we have the bird taking the drink back, and we have the symbolism of the world tree goat or cow suckling the awl. A very interesting point here that I actually just came to think of is that the sweet fermented beverage kvass, still very loved in the Slavic countries, and which originally was a communal chewing of berries and spitting it out to create this alcoholic beverage. It shares etymology actually with kvasir in the Norse myth, and it means to press or to squeeze. That's to say exactly how the mead of inspiration came to be. And it gets even more interesting when we realize that the Vedic sacred drink soma also means to press or to squeeze, and that pressing is the main part of their sacred drink ritual. It's definitely also worth mentioning that Gunnlod lets Odin drink the mead of inspiration 1 sip from each of the 3 vessels, Odrörir, Son, and Boden. Compare that to Rigveda, millennia earlier, where it says, Indra, impetuous as a bull, he chose the sacred drink, and in 3 sacred beakers drank the juices. It's fascinating how this all fits together. We obviously also have Idun and her apples of youth, providing the gods with immortality, making sure that the eternal circle of life prevails. The name Idun itself means forever young, or rejuvenator. Another indication of that, of what the sacred drink really is. When Idun is kidnapped by the giant Thjasi, whose name actually also means water, and her apples are gone, the gods all of a sudden grow old and grey, and they fear that they will die. Only when Idun returns, life and order is back, spring is back, and everything is once again young, it sprouts. Another example, Sigurdriva, whose name means driver to victory. You see the second function here. She gives Sigurd a so-called memory drink from a drinking horn full of mead. And that too, a very clear reference to the sacred drink. Another interesting reference is Sigyn, Loki's wife. One of the few things we know about her is that when Skadi fastens a venomous snake over Loki's face, and the snake's venom drips, Sigyn is the one who holds a basin under the dripping venom, so that Loki won't get it in his face. But the basin grows full, and she pulls it away to go pour it out on the lands, during which time the venom drops on Loki, and this is the only time he suffers. So there also seems to be a connection to the sacred drink and the pouring of libations, so to say. The godliness of pouring. From the Celtic branch, I've already mentioned the myths about Nectan and his wife Boan. But in the Irish story of King Niall of the 9 hostages, we see another connection to the sacred drink when the hag compares her drink to mead, honey, and strong ale. In the 7th century Irish poem The Cauldron of Poesy, we see a cauldron described as the source of poetic ability. Its contents are a noble brew of all knowledge. In the famous grave of the Celtic prince from Hochdorf in Germany, dated to around 530 BCE, where it was found, or in that grave, in addition to many other grave goods, there was 9 drinking horns and a cauldron 80 centimeters high and 104 centimeters across, able to hold 500 liters of sacred drink made with honey and 100 different herbs. And studies from this grave have identified 58 of those herbs. I'll come back to that later. As I create this episode, I also come to think of the 2 Gauls, Asterix and Obelix. Well, they're more fictional though. And the magic potion they drink to beat the Romans. Silly example, possibly, but still a direct connection to the Indo-European sacred drink and its divine powers, and that this never really disappeared throughout time. The Ulster coronation ritual is also highly relevant. Throughout the Indo-European world, the sovereignty the sacred drink provides is reflected in the many rituals and ceremonies of king inauguration. The king was a personification of his people and was considered divine. He also presents the notion of ale or beer as the medium of his divinity. The distribution of alcohol as a means of maintaining kingship or sovereignty was one aspect of Indo-European drinking practices. And in this Ulster coronation ritual, to drink the quote-unquote broth of the mare is to drink pure kingship. This sovereignty and kingship that the sacred drink gives is also tightly related to the Indo-European horse goddess Equona and the horse sacrifice. The horse sacrifice was always performed when a king or chieftain was inaugurated. Equona is also called Meduna, meaning the intoxicator or goddess of mead. So you once again see the connection to sacred mead and what it provides us. Meduna can be seen later in goddesses like the Irish Medb, the Gaulish Meduna, and the Indian Madhavi. The previously mentioned Nectan, and cognates all over the Indo-European world, like Necken, etc., means water spirit in the shape of a horse. Also remember that the Greek god Neptune's animal symbol is the horse. And Neptune himself is related to the guardian of the fiery water. Also remember that when Perseus decapitates Medusa, her blood flows down in the sea foam, shaping the horse Pegasus. The importance of and the close relation between sovereignty, kingship, horses, and the sacred drink in the Indo-European spirituality and culture is so complex and immense that I simply can't do that justice in the same episode. Give me a heads up in the comments here, or on YouTube, or on Instagram, if you want me to cover this in a future episode. The connection between kingship, the sacred drink, and the horse goddess, etc. let me instead use Perseus as a smooth segue over to the Persian branch. According to the historian Herodotus, he claimed that Perseus was the progenitor of the Persian people. No matter if that's true or not, let me give you some examples of the Persian and Zoroastrian part of the Indo-European world. The Persians mention two sacred drinks or substances, homa and khwarena. I personally think that these two names refer to the same drink, homa. Homa is cognate with the Vedic soma drink. That also means juice or to press or squeeze. Khwarena means sacred power, the glory of the divine or the good things in life. And considering that the Persians themselves said that homa is filled with khwarena, I'm quite sure that they are the same beverage. According to them, it's a luminous and fiery liquid stored in fire and water. So you see here. Like I mentioned earlier about nectar, homa too exists in both a cosmic sense and in a ritual sense. An ideal and divine homa and a homa that we concoct in our own worship. In the Zoroastrian scriptures, there is a reference to the intoxication of homa. But it also says that this intoxication goes rightly and is in accord with cosmic law. They also mention that the homa drink partly comes from pressing pomegranate twigs. And pomegranate is, of course, the same symbolism of immortality as in the Greek myth about Demeter and Persephone. It should also contain water and milk, either from a cow or a goat. So once again, we have the link to the animal feeding the cosmos. Okay, so I've now given plenty of examples of the presence of the sacred drink in the various Indo-European spiritual branches and what it does. And I've also touched upon the ingredients in the sacred drink. But I'll talk about that a bit more. First of all, the sacred drink was undoubtedly mind-altering and psychoactive in some sense. But its main function was definitely not to give an intoxication just for the sake of it, but to rather offer strength and immortality to the gods, and hopefully you could take part of some of its benefits yourself. The debate about what the sacred drink really contains has been kidnapped by, on the one hand, pious purists claiming that the sacred drink barely existed, other than as a symbol for deep meditation, and that it certainly didn't contain any mind-altering substances at all. And on the other hand, those who want to portray our ancestors as spaced out trippy hippies to legitimize their own decadent lifestyle. So I'll instead talk about what we do know and how I prepare it myself for ritual. If we once again go to Rig Veda, the earliest Indo-European spiritual scripture we have, we see that the soma is compared with or equated to many different things. Honey, milk, the semen of a stallion, sap, and clarified butter, ghee. It's called honey, madhu, which is obviously cognate with mead, and inebriation, mada, from the same root. This shows that the mead aspect goes further back in time than the psychoactive plant theory. This doesn't exclude the possibility that the sacred drink contained both alcohol and something else, not the least for different occasions, but I'll come to that soon. In the Vedas, the sacred drink is further described as being mixed with milk, sour milk, and barley. This correlates with the Proto-Indo-European myth about the sacred drink, letting us know that it should be a mixture, most likely to reflect its dual nature of fire and water, and that it is fiery and white. The fiery being that which issues from the well, and the white is the return given by Cosmos back into the waters from the cosmic cow or goat. The white aspect also indicates milk or some other dairy product. By studying Indo-European spiritual texts, current and still ongoing rituals, archaeological studies, myths, etymology, folklore, and other sources, I can state at least 6 things about the sacred drink. First of all, it corresponds to the symbolism of fire meeting water when Cosmos was created. It should therefore be mixed. In ritual, something has to be burnt and something has to be liquid. Here it's also important to mention that the sacred drink has been stolen and should be taken back and put back within order. So this too should be reflected in the ritual. Next, the Indo-European sacred drinks are always described as sweet, simultaneously meaning honey. We see this in the Proto-Indo-European med, Vedic madhu, and of course the word mead. This word precedes all other versions of the sacred drink, so mead is definitely one of the main ingredients in this ritual beverage. We also have barley as a main ingredient in the sacred drink. I'd say that barley is actually one of the most important things overall within Indo-European spirituality. The sacred objects, for example, in the Greek mysteries were hidden in barley. We see innumerable places where it says that the gods accepted barley cakes and barley breads shaped as animals instead of real animal sacrifices. Offerings and the borders of sacred space were sprinkled with barley. So you see the importance here. In fact, the very etymology of barley shows that there's a divine connection. The Proto-Indo-European word for barley is yavos. In Sanskrit it is yava. In Proto-Iranian and Avestan it is yavas and yava. So that's very close here. Compare this to the Proto-Indo-European word yavesa, meaning divine ritual law. And then we see that they share the same root. Even if we took a look at today's Persian word for sacrifice or offering, it is yad, so still the same root as barley. Again, this too is a topic I could talk about for hours, but let's just state that there's a straight line between the divine and barley, and that barley is one of the main ingredients. Next up, we have the fact that so many of the names of the Indo-European sacred drinks indicate that it should be pressed or extracted or squeezed. So barley and other plants were roasted and the mead let simmer with it and then pressed through the remaining malt and left to age. I'll come back to that too soon. What we definitely also know is that the sacred drink contained milk, either from a cow or from a goat, representing the cosmology and reflecting these animals suckling the cosmos and the whole manifestation. So it was finally mixed with milk before being offered and consumed. So the key words so far are, to wrap up a bit, something burnt together with liquid, sweet or honey, barley, pressed or extracted, and milk. Lastly, we come to the more varying and speculative factor, that the sacred drink was mixed with or pressed through herbs, plants, drugs, or other mind-altering substances. There's no doubt that it was mixed with herbs and plants, but the question is, with what herbs and plants, and what effects did they have? The late Vedics used a plant that only grows high up in the Himalayas, but since that one doesn't grow in the Proto-Indo-European homeland, it can't possibly have been the original. And I mentioned the Hochdorf chieftain grave with a cauldron that contained 500 liters of the sacred drink. Studies have shown clear traces of mead and at least 100 different herbs, of which 58 have been determined. Cannabis was one of them. And that's not a bad guess for the original sacred drink, considering that already the Proto-Indo-Europeans are known as one of the first cannabis traders or even smugglers. The Persian and Zoroastrian sacred drink still today contains pomegranate and ephedra, the stems of the ephedra plants. And ephedra obviously produces the drug ephedrine. And when we come to the ancient Greeks, it gets even juicier, pun intended. I can tell you that they did not do anything half-heartedly. Listen to this. Studies of the containers for the ritualistic Kikyon drink show traces of opium poppy, psilocybin mushrooms, cannabis, DMT, fly agaric, barley with ergot fungi that produces LSD, and alcohol, all in the same drink. So they did not joke around there, at least in some cases and some rituals. When it comes to DMT, that's another thing I could talk about for hours. Studies have shown that our bodies contain much higher levels of DMT when we're born and when we die. So there's definitely a link to death and rebirth, which was of course what the mysteries and the sacred drink ritual too was all about. But that too is for another episode. My personal opinion is that the original sacred drink consisted of mead and milk that was pressed through roasted barley that had actually rotted and grown ergot fungi, which is actually very common when it rots. When it's grown ergot fungi, it has the same effect as LSD. On the other hand, other studies show that sometimes there was no psychoactive substances at all, other than alcohol, perhaps. So this seems to have varied depending on the occasion and function. I and the Hamingja Foundation prepare the sacred drink for these rituals by first brewing a mead, which of course takes some time, then roasting barley, letting the mead simmer with the roasted barley, so it becomes all yellow-brownish, which also fits if you compare to those we see among the other Indo-European peoples, and then press it down in another vessel, and just before ritual I mix it with milk while chanting prayers. In this ritual purification is extra important. Ritual washing, to wear clean white clothes and clean shoes, and a pure mind, of course. The full version of the very important sacred drink offering ritual, including other uses for the sacred drink, like in weddings and name givings, it will be covered in our upcoming courses and classes for the Spiritual Leader Academy we're working on right now. So look out for that. The sacred drink, known by many names, nectar, medu, mead, ambrosia, amrita, soma, Homa Kikion. It represents an enigmatic bridge between the mortal and the divine, between the creation myth and the creation itself. A communion between humans and higher realms, reflecting a primordial belief in a cosmic connection that transcends earthly existence. Its preparation was a sacred art, entrusted to priests or ritual specialists, who meticulously crafted and sanctified the elixir through chants, prayers, and invocations, invoking the blessings of the divine. The sacred drink is what keeps the gods immortal. It therefore must stem from the source itself. No wonder then that this elixir and its ceremonies became integral to the cosmological beliefs and religious practices of Indo-European societies. It held and holds great significance, granting the gods and ancestors immortality and the ability to uphold and maintain their cosmic roles and functions. And to us, it conveys divine qualities and inspiration, spiritual insight, facilitating a connection with the divine, wisdom, courage, the power to act, fertility, and vitality. The drops that we have drunk have entered our hearts, an immortal inside mortals. We drank the soma, we became immortal, we reached the light, we found the gods. My name is Björn Ekdahl, with a sacred drink in my right hand. And as always, the divine in me bows to the divine in you. I want to thank you for listening. Make sure to subscribe so you increase your Hamingja straight away. You will find more information about the podcast and the foundation on hamingja.foundation. You will also find us on Instagram, Discord and YouTube, and more platforms will follow. Feel free to contact us if you have questions, requests or need guidance. I hope to hear from you soon and that you'll tune in next time. And until then, seek not the religion of your ancestors. Seek what your ancestors sought.